I don't know about you, but I've found that a certain amount of conflict is unavoidable. Because we are people, and different ones of us view things differently. So we're constantly going to be facing conflict. But how can we keep the conflict from becoming destructive? I believe that conflict, if appropriately managed, can actually be, to a degree, helpful to an organization. It sharpens our sense of values. We are a little clearer on what is really important, so sometimes conflict can be a good thing. But let's review several faces of conflict. It shows up in different ways. I'm sorry that's so small you can hardly read it. Mismatched expectations. If one individual in an organization has an entirely different perspective on what is expected of them or of their service to the organization, if it doesn't match that of the employer or their boss, there are going to be problems. If our expectations are not aligned, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. A second area would be diverse styles and values and opinions. This is where the rich variety of the church can be good, but it also creates a degree of conflict. Let's recognize it. There's oftentimes competition for power or resources or recognition. And you see this both in churches and in offices and in other settings. It can show up most anywhere. Interpersonal conflict might describe that goes on between two individuals. It may not be a boss and an employee. It might be two secretaries that fight over something in the office. It might be two members in the church that have a long-standing feud. They haven't talked or agreed in years. Some of this is very difficult to address. Age, gender, ethnicity differences will also contribute to differences of perspective and understanding. So how is conflict typically expressed? My clicker is not working as well as I would like. I mentioned earlier how many times conflict goes underground. It's not openly expressed. It's expressed in small groups, behind closed doors, out of earshot of those that really need to hear it, many times in the parking lot. It's the group after the meeting that continues to process the decisions or the discussion that went on in the meeting. Now, a certain amount of reflection and debriefing, and sometimes those are just personal conversations. But how do you know when it becomes negative or difficult? What about power plays? We talked about when power is being conserved, it's not being shared. There are ways of becoming aggressive at trying to gain more power. Sometimes you recognize that conflict is expressed by withdrawal. A person simply goes silent. They used to be a contributor to the discussion, to the committee, whatever it might be, but no longer. They have become silent. Or, in an extreme sense, they might leave the group entirely. In a church setting, they quit attending. That is one expression of conflict. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the passive-aggressive or avoidance posture. Again, another indirect way of expressing disagreement. That is not healthy. We would prefer a direct expression of disagreement. So as leaders, we must invite disagreement to keep it healthy. And then, of course, there is the escalation where one thing leads to another. One disagreement is followed by a few comments that make it even worse. And that precipitates the need for revenge, and it just gets worse and worse and worse until eventually you either find an impasse where nobody is willing to move, or you find an eruption where everything blows up. And we'll talk about that as well. So I would suggest that we begin our discussion of conflict with the Matthew 18 model, when Jesus said, if you have anything against your brother, go to him yourself. It starts one-on-one. We don't talk about the problem to someone else. We go to the individual and do our best to resolve it together. We include others only as appropriate and necessary. As Jesus described, you might take another friend. You might eventually expand that to a few others in the case of a church. If two members aren't able to resolve it, they might invite an elder to join them, or two. Eventually, they might say, would you come talk to our church board about this? The church does have a role in conflict, but let's make sure that we follow Jesus' process first. Be humble, be sensitive, and listen with your heart. If there was one key to diffusing conflict, I think it would be that last word, listen. Too many times, we may be silent while they are talking, but we're only preparing our objection, our argument, our next comment. We're not truly listening. If you can school yourself to ask a question following their last statement, that tells me that you're seeking to better understand. You're asking for more information. Listening is critically important to diffusing conflict. I'm told that every human relationship goes through 4 identifiable stages. And I'm going to develop a little diagram here that you're going to be looking at, recognizing that anytime we put things in a graphic format like this, it's an oversimplification, isn't it? Human complexity doesn't reduce itself easily to 4 simple steps. But it also is helpful to at least recognize, to have a mental framework about how human relationships work. So let's at least explore it, and then you'll be able to adapt it as necessary. Every human relationship begins with information and expectations. I'm going to use as an illustration a romantic relationship. I showed you a picture yesterday of the woman to whom I'm now married. Her name is Marilyn. There was a time when we did not know each other. We attended the same college for a year and a half, but had never met each other. And then all of a sudden, she walked into the room. And now I was aware. I had a little bit of information. Was it reliable information? Not really. I just looked at her. And the event that we were both attending meant that we had something in common. And I thought to myself, I need to talk to her. I needed more information, right? So over a period of weeks and months and years, our interaction continued. Information was exchanged. We learned more and more about each other. We began a dating relationship, which implies a certain amount of commitment, but you're still exploring this very tentative relationship. And for a relationship to be solid, you want to explore it in a variety of different settings. If all you do is get dressed up and go out to eat and say goodnight, that is only one part of life. And you'll know whether or not they can read a menu, can order their food, can eat without drooling on themselves. That doesn't tell you a lot about that person. So you do other things. You do active things. You involve other people. You visit their family. They visit your family. Why? Because you want more and more information upon which to form expectations. And you assume that this person you're getting to know now will continue to be like that later. Only if you like what you learn do you take the next step. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you don't like it, you say, "This has been a great evening. Thank you. Good night." No obligation to go any further. But if you like it, you say, "Before I leave, could I get your phone number? Could I call you tomorrow? Could we go out maybe again sometime?" You want to prolong this thing. Eventually, I came to the place where I learned enough, I was confident enough of those expectations that I said, "Marilyn, will you marry me?" So that next step, the step of commitment, stage 2, is a very important step. It's a very visible, it's a formal step, but it doesn't take much time. Our wedding lasted about 45 minutes. The service itself. But they were highly important minutes, very symbolic minutes. They changed my life forever, because from that point on, I vowed, as long as life should last, I would be committed to her. That was my choice from that point forward. So stage 2, commitment, is a very important step, but it's generally a very brief step. It doesn't take a lot of time. What is stage 3? It is one of stability and productivity. In other words, your expectations here are being met. Marilyn is, in fact, much the same after our marriage as before. She didn't change into a whining, complaining, negative person. She's still a very positive, optimistic, godly person. That is a great place to be, in a place of stability and productivity. I didn't mean children. I meant a productive relationship, a relationship that continues to grow deeper because you're in a good place of understanding. Now, the point is, the more information you're able to gain and the clearer your expectations in stage 1, the better the chance that you'll have a good, stable, and productive relationship. Thus, the importance in an employment setting of information gained here through, say, a job description. Why? That helps the employee and the employer know what to expect in the future. You get the idea. So, we might also call stage 3 the honeymoon phase. Everybody's feeling good. What's there not to like? Until something that comes up that nobody expected that challenges one of those expectations. You notice I referenced yesterday, early in our married life, Marilyn said, "You're not paying much attention to me." Lots of attention, lots of energy invested in the church, but I feel pretty much abandoned many times. That was a conversation I wasn't looking for, but did I need to hear it? Yes, I did. As soon as that little level of conflict appeared, we might call it a pinch. Pinches are annoying, but they're not life-threatening, right? Depending on how I would react. So the fact that I cared about this person and wanted to know what would make her feel better about this future that we shared, I began to ask more questions. And out of that came a new understanding. We went back up to stage 1, talking through a little bit more information. When does this happen? How does it happen? What do I say and do that makes you feel this way? All kinds of questions with new information, and that usually clarifies the expectations. And if we're good at that conversation, we're then willing to make a new commitment. That's what I meant. A new commitment that takes us back into this stable and productive relationship. That would be nice if we solved problems in that way. In other words, catch things early, address them openly, ask appropriate questions, make sure we're listening so that we can stay in a positive cycle of relationship. But for whatever reason, sometimes things come up that are either so emotionally laden, or we've talked through this several times and we haven't found a lasting solution, or there's just so much emotion involved that I can't talk about this. And yeah, you may try and hold it in for a while, but is it good to try and hold things in indefinitely? No, sooner or later, things are going to blow up, right? And when that happens, we could say, now we're in a crunch. This is where the whole relationship is at risk. And the first tendency of most people at a time like this is to simply walk out the door. See that little green arrow right down there? To walk out the door and say, I'm done. I quit this job, I'm out of this marriage, whatever the case might be. Why? Because there's a lot of emotion, it's difficult, and if I get away from this particular relationship, I can solve the problem. But it's not always that easy. And many times we walk away from a difficult relationship, from a conflict, only escaping but not really understanding what was going on back there. So we take hurt with us from that experience into the next experience. We're more easily wounded the next time. And before long, we become a very bitter, angry person. That, simply walking away, is not a healthy solution to conflict. Now you can see there's another little part of this diagram. You see those two arrows coming together with two lines, parallel lines. There's no movement. There's just a lot of pressure. And sometimes that's the temptation that someone would say, you've got to learn to live with it. Men and women are just different. And that's true. But does that solve the problem? Usually you can't just stuff it indefinitely. Even if you could for a while, it doesn't last. So to simply admit, that's just the way it is in church work, you've got to make some sacrifices, would that have solved the problem with Marilyn? No, I might have become a single pastor again if I took that position. Doesn't help. What is another option? Well, another suggestion is sometimes go back to stage 2. Remember the old commitment? Remember how happy we were when we were first married? Let's just forget this little problem right here. You forget, I'll forget, we'll be fine. Is that a good solution? Well, it's nice to remember a better time in the relationship, but if you haven't talked about the real issues, you haven't resolved anything. And so very quickly, you'll cycle back down into the disruption, the crunch, and now the emotion will be even more intense, and away you go into some other oblivion. So as you can imagine, the best course, even if you're in a crunch, is to go all the way back to stage 1, information. What do I need to know about the way you're feeling right now? What do you need to know about me right now? Can we talk about this as adults right now? Describing our own emotions, trying to understand, ask questions for clarification, really work through this issue in which we find ourselves now. Does that solve every problem? No. There may still be times when after careful, prayerful discussion, a relationship cannot be saved. One or both of you realizes this is not going to work. And so there is always the opportunity to exit a relationship. Now, as Seventh-day Adventists, I'm committed that divorce is never an option. I believe that with God's help, He can change me into a different person. He can work in our relationship. He can solve problems. But of course, this diagram refers to business relationships and all kinds of other things. So you understand, you still have a choice that you make later on, but now it's an informed choice. You understand the issues. You understand what you contributed to this problem, and the chance of repeating the problem again and again and again go way down. Everyone has learned from this process. So, what are the takeaways from this little diagram? Well, I suppose one is the value of information and expectations. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to talk. Constantly. Communicate. Especially when there are issues, when there are disagreements. We must talk. To put it under the table, to stuff it, is not a solution. Second, I would say, catch things early. Make a commitment with the people in your life. If some of you are here as an office team, I hope you'll agree. Let's talk when we first are aware of a problem. It's a lot easier to solve a pinch than it is a crunch. And of course, that will take you back up to stage number 1. Does that make sense? That becomes a mental framework within which I've been able to work through many different scenarios. What applies to a marriage also applies to church work. Think about that. What is stage one in the evangelistic model that David has been describing? It's first awareness of not only a spiritual need, but here's a church that's been doing some cool stuff. I saw them on the news. That's a little bit of information, not much, but might be enough for them to say, I want more information. They might attend one of their events. You get the idea. Many different activities, ministries that he's described is simply designed to get people engaged in information gathering. And if they're willing to pursue it to the next level and say, tell me more about this Jesus that you reference so much, this church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that leads to Bible studies, lots more information, clarified expectations, and what is this form of commitment? Baptism. Talk about brief. Doesn't take long, but it's life transformational. Stability and productivity. They're feeling happy about the decision they've made. They're doing their best to live life as a newborn Christian. And that lasts for a while until there's something that comes up at the church that they didn't anticipate. A disappointment, a hurt, a conversation. If they can catch it early as a pinch, if the church models openness and an ability to engage and process in healthy ways, you retain the member. But if people don't want to talk, if they say, you're just going to have to learn to live with this, we don't talk about that here. That's not the way the pastor does things. That only makes it worse, doesn't it? And before long, that once active and happy member becomes an inactive, unhappy member, or maybe lost entirely to the church. So there are many ways of applying what we've learned here. Now let's take it one step further. Susan Scott is a business writer. She's not religious that I know of. This is not a Seventh-day Adventist book or even a religious book, but it's a very helpful book talking about fierce conversations, not combative conversations, conversations that are robust, that are rich with meaning and significance and dialogue. I would encourage you to look at fierce conversations, achieving success at work and in life, one conversation at a time. And in her observation, many times, because one or the other of us is uncomfortable with the topic, we avoid a conversation that could change everything for the better. So missed conversations become lost opportunities, and that can contaminate the workplace. That's her observation. In this book, she also describes a process of resolving conflict when you might be a supervisor, a manager, a director, or the boss, and you have an employee that you're going to have to address in some way. So I took the steps that she provided and added a couple of others that I think would make it more appropriate for us as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, added these two at the beginning. Step number one, in terms of this confrontation that you know is inevitable, you're going to have to address some problem with an employee. And she says, first, pray. And in doing so, reflect on your motives. Why does this bother me? What am I trying to accomplish? What really is going on here? Then she suggests that this is where she starts with number 3, name the issue. Too many times, we can't name the issue. Oh, we have a vague, generalized feeling of, this just isn't right. I don't like this. But why? Be specific. Name the issue. Illustrate the issue. Can you think of a time when this particular problem was at work? Number 5, describe your emotions. Usually we bring an emotional response to that particular item. Identify your contribution to this problem, because there's always two sides to every conflict, is there not? Clarify what is at stake. Number 7, identify your contribution to this problem. Number 8, indicate your desire to resolve the issue. and then invite their response. And before I go any further, she says, this is so important that you want to spend time preparing for this conversation. You want to be able to write out what the issue is, an illustration of it, describing your emotions and what is at stake. You want all of that so clear that you might actually have it prepared in writing in such a way that you can deliver it in 2 minutes or less. You don't want to bombard this employee. You simply want to state, without a lot of emotion, you want to state clearly what it is that's going on. You might say, Keith, I noticed that for the last couple of meetings, you've come late, and when you do, you ask questions that put us back. We need to start on time. In fact, that happened again last Monday, and that then as you ask those questions, I find myself getting upset, annoyed, and my responses to you aren't what they should be. I accept that. But I think there's got to be a way that we can work through this together. You see, I'm trying to capture a few of the core things in a very brief opening statement. Then, of course, we invite their response. Do you understand what I'm talking about? What do you have? What is your perspective that I'm not seeing? What don't I understand about what you're bringing to this? How can we get through this? You're digging for full understanding. You're listening. You're asking questions. You're open to their input. Now it's a dialogue, isn't it? It's not just the supervisor scolding the employee and walking away. Now you're understanding that it's not just a matter of getting up too late. It's not just a matter of not prioritizing this meeting with you. It's a fact that over the last several weeks, one of his children has been in the hospital. And he's been stopping by the hospital in the morning to try and spend some time with that child before the day begins. And that has thrown his whole schedule off. He apologizes. He says, I'll do much better. But all of a sudden now you have more information. You realize, wait a minute. I was assuming things that aren't true. I assumed this wasn't important to you. I assumed you were being lazy. Now I apologize. I didn't know anything about your child being in the hospital. How can I support you? You see how very quickly things can change if you're open to new information, if you ask for it, if you're listening with your heart. Then, of course, how can we move forward given this new information? You might both agree, we have been meeting at 9. Would it help for the next couple of weeks if we shifted that to 10 o'clock? Yes, that would be wonderful, he says. Very quickly, you've moved to a solution, haven't you? A solution that has brought you closer together, has preserved your relationship, and will actually make you more effective. And then, of course, you have a new agreement. 12 steps that she suggests. And I can tell you, there have been several experiences where I have pulled out this sheet and I have filled it out myself because I have an employee that I'm going to have to address on a very specific, difficult issue. Now, if it's a significant issue, you're going to have to make an appointment for a conversation like this. You don't want to blindside them. Not every place and time is the right place and time. And so you're going to want to make an appointment. And yet, I firmly believe, in fact, I've seen it with my own eyes. As I've worked through this process, not only has my heart changed, but I've been able to restore a working relationship, a very positive relationship, which is actually better than it was before. It was the conflict and how we chose to work through the conflict that has made for a better organization. Now, not always are you dealing with conflict that requires confrontation between employer and employee or something like that. There are times when you're more equals. In fact, let's consider a marriage. What happens when the conflict is in the marriage? You might not follow this particular description, but it's very similar. And for those of you that have used the Prepare Enrich instrument to help couples in preparing for marriage, that is a very rich tool. And they include a conflict resolution plan that includes 10 steps. Good steps for marriages and other situations in which you're more peers, you're friends, it's not a power versus no power sort of situation. But when you're equal, suggesting set a time and place for discussion, as I suggested, define the problem, be specific, list the ways you each contribute to the problem. Does that sound familiar? Kind of similar to the last set, isn't it? List past attempts to resolve the issue that were not successful. Brainstorm possible solutions. So let's just say that Sabbath morning, getting ready for church, is our conflict time. And so I say, Marilyn, we need to talk about Sabbath morning. It's just not working for us. I get frustrated, you get frustrated. When can we talk about this? It's not going to be a fun conversation, but let's block out some time. Well, how much time will it take? I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes? Okay. When can we do it when we're both at our best? It's not going to be at bedtime because we're exhausted then. Let's find some other time. Okay, maybe let's meet for lunch tomorrow. That'll be fun. We can have a little bit of fun time, but also address an issue that is real to us. So we get together. So what is the problem? Well, the problem from my perspective is you're never ready on time for church. We're always late because of you. She says, wait a minute. I'm not the problem. You're the problem. How is that? All you do is get up, get yourself ready. I'm expected to fix the breakfast, clean up the breakfast, fix myself and the children. You expect me to do all this and be ready?
Yes.
Yes. You can see a conversation is beginning. Very important to be able to say, okay, what really is the problem? We're not able to get to Sabbath school on time, but what are causing the problem? Well, I guess the fact that I'm not helping with getting the children ready or fixing the breakfast or cleaning up the breakfast. There's lots of things that I could do. List past attempts to resolve the issue that were not successful. You mean my sitting in the car and honking the horn was not helpful? No, it wasn't. I needed you in the house, cleaning up the kids. As we work through this, we begin to then come to brainstorming possible solutions. And anybody can see there are some solutions here that are ripe for the picking. And we might list a lot of them. Brainstorming means you list them without evaluating them and saying, that's a silly idea. No, so you say, okay, let's set the alarm for an hour earlier for you, and I'll keep sleeping in. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's see. Maybe you get the kids ready, I'll get the breakfast ready. Oh, I don't like your breakfast. What if we try, you can see, you just brainstorm lots of different ideas until gradually one or two begin to emerge as perhaps the best ideas, and then you begin to act on that. So number 6, discuss and evaluate each possible solution. Agree on one solution to try. Okay, let's do this. Next Sabbath, I'll get the kids ready. I'll get them out of bed. I'll comb their hair. I can do that. I do that sometimes when they go to school. I'll get them dressed. And you take care of the breakfast. We'll see if that works. Okay, we've agreed on one solution to try. How will each work toward this solution? We each brought something to the conflict. Now we know that there is something we can both do to resolve the problem. Set another meeting to discuss progress. This is the one I tend to avoid. I want to assume that whatever we agree is going to work is just going to work. So let's just pretend it's good now. I don't want to be in another difficult conversation about this. But why is this important? I may feel good about the solution, but it may not be working as well for Marilyn. So set another meeting to discuss the progress. Okay, let's give it 1 week and talk about it again. Next Tuesday, we'll meet for lunch and we'll see if we're doing any better. And then, of course, the suggestion is reward and affirm progress. Even if you're not getting as far as you would like, if you see that you're both trying, say, you know, we're doing something right. We need to make some adjustments. So At least we feel good about where we're at and know how then to take the next step. You go back to your brainstorming list, try another solution, etc., etc. Does that make sense? I'm convinced that if we take conflict as an opportunity, not as a threat, an opportunity to deepen your understanding, to strengthen the organization, to change a few aspects of your life or your engagement with other people, you will grow as an individual, as a leader. Your organization will be stronger. God's work will benefit. Conflict is unavoidable. How we relate to conflict is our responsibility, and I believe we can do better. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Spouses, kids, co-workers, employees, the public at large. How we treat each other says an awful lot about the God we serve. God bless you.